Urgent. Did you know NASA suffers biggest blackout in history while observing 3I/Atlas? And what happened during those 47 minutes of total darkness would change everything we thought we knew about the universe. Cut everything. Cut now. Sarah Chen's scream echoed through Control Room 7 at the Johnson Space Center as all the screens around her flashed red before plunging into absolute darkness. It was 3:42 a.m. on March 14, 2024, and for the first time in 63 years of history, NASA had just lost simultaneous contact with all of its space observation systems. The silence that followed lasted only 3 seconds, but to Sarah it seemed like 3 eternities. She was the director of interplanetary communications, responsible for coordinating data transmissions from 17 satellites, 4 space probes, and the International Space Station itself. In her 12-year career, she had never faced anything like this. Not even in the worst-case disaster training scenarios. What the hell just happened? The deep voice of Michael Torres, the night operations commander, cut through the darkness. Emergency lights began to flicker on, casting ghostly shadows on the walls lined with dead equipment. Sarah felt her hands shake as she frantically typed commands into her tablet, the only device still working because it operated on an independent network. I don't know, Mike. The safety protocols should have prevented this. It's physically impossible for all systems to fail at once, unless... She stopped, feeling a chill run down her spine. Unless what? Mike approached her, his flashlight illuminating Sarah's tense face. Unless something deliberately shut everything down from the inside out. 47 minutes earlier, everything had been normal. More than normal, it had been perfect. The 16-person night shift team was monitoring something extraordinary with growing excitement. 3I/Atlas, the third interstellar object ever detected by humankind, was making an unprecedented approach to our solar system. Unlike Oumuamua and Comet Borisov, this cosmic visitor exhibited characteristics that defied all conventional scientific explanations. Sarah, you have to see this, said Jennifer Park, the 28-year-old junior astrophysicist who had discovered the anomaly 2 weeks earlier. Her eyes sparkled with that mixture of awe and terror that only great scientific discoveries provoke. The emission patterns are changing. It's as if it were responding to our observations. Sarah remembered perfectly well, laughing nervously. Space objects don't respond to anything, Jen. It's probably atmospheric interference, or... It's not interference. I've checked 7 times. Every time we increase the intensity of our scanners, the object's energy signature increases proportionally. Sarah! Jennifer had lowered her voice, looking around to make sure no one else was listening. What if it's not a comet? What if it's something completely different? Those words still echoed in Sarah's mind as she watched the chaos around her. Jennifer was in the corner of the room, hugging her knees, in shock. 3 technicians were trying to manually reboot the auxiliary systems. Mike was shouting orders to the security team over the portable radio. And Sarah knew she had exactly 47 minutes to figure out what was going on before Object 3I/Atlas completed its maximum approach and disappeared into deep space, possibly forever. What no one knew, yet, was that this blackout was not a technical accident. And the answers Sarah was about to discover would shake not only her career, but humanity's very understanding of our place in the cosmos. The clock read 3:45 a.m. There were 44 minutes left until everything changed forever. And in the depths of space, 380 million kilometers away, 3I/Atlas continued its silent trajectory toward Earth, carrying with it a secret that some within NASA would do anything to keep hidden. Because the truth about that object wasn't just scary. It was absolutely terrifying. If you're feeling that chill down your spine and want to find out what really happened that night, you'll definitely want to follow this story to the end. Sarah, someone's trying to break into the physical server. Marcus Webb's voice came over the radio, sharp as broken glass. Marcus was the head of cybersecurity, a man Sarah rarely saw leave his bunker in the basement of the complex. If he was using the radio instead of the internal systems, something was very, very wrong. Sarah felt her stomach churn. What do you mean, trying? Our systems are down, Marcus. No one should be able to access anything. That's exactly why I'm calling. Someone is using the blackout as cover. The physical logs show 3 attempts to access Vault 12 in the last 8 minutes. Sarah. He paused heavily. Vault 12 is where we store the classified Atlas project data. All the raw data we've collected on 3i/Atlas over the last 2 weeks. Sarah's heart raced. Project Atlas was the internal codename for the observation of the interstellar object, information that should only be known to the elite team and senior directors. Marcus, how many people have authorized access to that vault? Besides you and me? Only 4. Director Castellano, Dr. Park, Commander Torres, and... Marcus hesitated. And Dr. Richard Vance. Richard Vance. The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. Sarah had known Vance for 7 years. He was NASA's most brilliant and most arrogant senior astrophysicist. A man who considered rules to be flexible suggestions and who had political connections powerful enough to survive 3 attempts at dismissal. 3 weeks ago, Vance had been formally removed from Project Atlas after an explosive argument with Jennifer Park over observation protocols. Was he here tonight? Sarah asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. His badge was scanned at the south gate at 10:47 p.m. He never does night shifts, Sarah. Never. Sarah turned off the radio and looked around the control room. Mike Torres was busy coordinating the maintenance crew. Jennifer remained huddled in the corner, but her eyes now followed Sarah with disturbing intensity. And there, on an auxiliary monitor that had just partially come back to life, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold, a line of code running in real time, systematically deleting the Atlas project files. Someone was destroying the evidence. And she had only 38 minutes left to stop them. Sarah crossed the room in 3 long strides and grabbed Jennifer by the arm, pulling her into a side hallway. Jen, I need you to tell me everything. Everything. What was really going on with 3i/Atlas before the blackout? Jennifer looked around like a cornered animal. Her hands were shaking violently. Sarah, I shouldn't have seen that. Vance told me to forget it, said it was a calibration error, but I know what I saw in the data and... Jennifer. Sarah held the young scientist's face with both hands, forcing eye contact. Breathe. Focus on me. Tell me. The tears streaming down Jennifer's face carried the weight of a secret she should never have discovered. 3i/Atlas isn't a comet, Sarah. It's not an asteroid. It's not natural. Her voice was an agonized whisper. 15 days ago, when I began detailed spectroscopic analysis, I detected perfect geometric patterns on the surface. Structures that cannot form naturally. And then the signals began. What signals? Electromagnetic pulses at specific frequencies. Pure mathematics encoded in radio waves. Sarah, it was sending us a message. And Vance knew. He always knew. Jennifer choked on her own words. When I confronted him, you know what he told me? That some secrets are too big for humanity to bear. That revealing this would cause global panic. That I needed to keep my mouth shut or my career would be over before it began. Sarah felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. For a terrible moment, she couldn't process what she was hearing. A message. From something that crossed the interstellar void. Something that wasn't natural. Did you save copies of the data? Sarah asked, her voice coming out firmer than she expected. Jennifer nodded, pulling a small USB drive from her pocket. Raw data, preliminary analysis, everything. I hid it in 3 different locations because I knew they would try to erase everything. She pressed the drive into Sarah's hand. But there's more. Something I discovered 2 hours before the blackout. Something Vance doesn't know I know. What? 3i/Atlas wasn't just sending us messages, Sarah. It was responding. And our latest high-intensity scans. Jennifer closed her eyes, as if gathering the courage to say the unthinkable. Our scans woke it up. Before Sarah could respond, a muffled explosion echoed through the hallway. The emergency lights flashed 3 times and went out completely. In the absolute darkness that followed, Sarah heard heavy footsteps approaching rapidly. Multiple pairs of boots. Moving with the military precision of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Sarah Chen. An authoritative male voice broke through the darkness. High-powered flashlights came on, temporarily blinding her. Director Chen, I need you to come with me immediately. Direct order from Director Castellano. When her eyes adjusted, Sarah saw 5 security men blocking the hallway. These weren't ordinary NASA security guards. They wore black uniforms with no identification, the kind of clothing that secret government operations wore when they didn't want to leave any traces. And the man in front, a guy in his 40s with a scar on his chin, had his hand resting casually on the gun in his holster. Where is Director Castellano? Sarah asked, keeping Jennifer protectively behind her. Classified information. You need to come with us. Now. And if I refuse? The man smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. Then we're going to have a problem, Director Chen. And problems during national security emergencies tend to be resolved in unpleasant ways. Sarah felt the USB drive burning in her closed palm. At that moment, she had to make an impossible choice. Cooperate with people who were clearly covering up the most important discovery in human history, or resist and risk not only her career, but possibly her life and Jennifer's. The clock read 4:09 a.m. There were 20 minutes left until 3I/Atlas completed its approach. And Sarah finally understood the terrifying truth. The blackout wasn't to hide what NASA had discovered. It was to hide what was about to happen when that mysterious object got closer to Earth. Because if Jennifer was right about having awakened something out there in the cosmic void, then the blackout wasn't the end of the problem. It was just the beginning. And there was someone inside NASA, someone with enough power to mobilize paramilitary teams and erase decades of security protocols, who would rather plunge humanity into ignorance than allow the truth to come to light. Sarah raised her hands slowly, keeping the USB drive hidden between her fingers. Her brain was working at full speed, calculating angles, evaluating options. 12 years at NASA had taught her one crucial thing. People who use brute force rarely expect strategic intelligence in response. All right. I'll go with you, she said, her voice strangely calm. But Jennifer stays. She has nothing to do with this. The man with the scar assessed Sarah for 3 long seconds. Dr. Park is coming too. Direct orders. Orders from whom, exactly? Sarah stepped forward, placing herself between the guns and Jennifer. Because Director Castellano is in Geneva presenting results at the ESA conference. I confirmed his schedule myself yesterday. So tell me, who the hell is giving orders here? It was a shot in the dark, but Sarah saw the momentary hesitation in the man's eyes. He hadn't expected her to know that. In that microsecond of uncertainty, Sarah understood something fundamental. These men were not following official NASA protocol. They were following orders from someone operating in the shadows. The director's location is none of your concern, he replied, regaining his composure. Last chance, Director Chen. Sarah was about to respond when Mike Torres' voice boomed over the newly reactivated loudspeaker system. Attention, all crews. We have partial power restoration in the East Sector. Repeat, partial power restored. All personnel are to return to their stations immediately. Alpha 7 protocol in effect. Alpha 7 protocol. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was a code she and Mike had created years ago during security drills. It meant hostile situation confirmed. Proceed with extreme caution. Mike knew something was wrong. He was giving her a window. The scarred man frowned, tapping the communicator in his ear. Confirm power status, he muttered. Understood. Maintain perimeter. He looked back at Sarah. Change of plans. We're going to the main control room. Everyone together. As the group moved through the dimly lit corridors, Sarah let the USB drive slip discreetly from her hand into the inside pocket of her jacket. Her mind was frantically working on a plan. She needed 3 things: time, access to a working terminal, and a way to transmit Jennifer's data out of NASA before it was completely erased. When they reached the main control room, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Half of the stations had come back to life. Technicians were running between the equipment, and Mike Torres was commanding everything from the center of the room like a conductor leading an orchestra in full symphony. But it was what Sarah saw on the main screens that made her blood run cold. 3I/Atlas was brighter. Much brighter. Mike, tell me this is a calibration error, Sarah said, feeling Jennifer tremble beside her. Mike turned, and Sarah saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Pure, genuine fear. It's not an error, Sarah. Whatever it is, it's increasing its energy output by the minute. And there's more. He pointed to a trajectory chart. It slowed down. Objects in interstellar trajectory don't slow down spontaneously. It's physically impossible without propulsion. Unless it has propulsion, Jennifer whispered beside Sarah. The man with the scar took a threatening step forward, but was interrupted by a voice from the back door. Let her speak. Sarah spun on her heels and saw Richard Vance entering the room. But this wasn't the arrogant, confident Vance she knew. This Vance had deep dark circles under his eyes, trembling hands, and the devastated expression of a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. You, Jennifer spat the word like poison. You did this. You ordered the blackout to hide what we found. Vance let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Hide. Jennifer, I didn't order anything. I tried to stop it. He rubbed his face with his hands, looking on the verge of collapse. You think I'm the villain? That I'm covering up the discovery out of ambition or fear? Christ. I wish I were covering it up. It would be so much simpler. Sarah sensed something change in the room. So what's going on, Vance? And don't give me any of your cryptic bullshit. There are, she glanced at her watch, 12 minutes until maximum approach. Just tell us. Vance walked over to an auxiliary terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard. A series of classified documents appeared on the screens. Sarah recognized some of the stamps: National Security Level 5, Exclusive Presidential Access, Special Majestic Compartment. 42 years ago, Vance began, his voice breaking, we detected the first sign. Not from 3I/Atlas, from something much, much farther away. A mathematical pattern repeating at impossible frequencies. It took us 2 decades to decode. When we finally did, he paused, swallowing hard. It was a warning. A warning about what? Sarah asked, though part of her already knew the answer. About them. About ancient things floating in the void between the stars. Probes left behind by civilizations that existed and disappeared billions of years before Earth was formed. The message said that these probes remain dormant until they detect specific technological signatures. And then, Vance looked directly at Jennifer, and there were tears in his eyes. Then they wake up. And they come to investigate. Sarah felt as if the ground was opening up beneath her feet. Are you saying that 3I/Atlas is one of those probes? And that we woke it up? It wasn't your fault, Vance said quickly, but there was desperation in his voice. I was trying to stop this from happening. I was removed from the project because I disagreed with the high-intensity observation protocols. I knew that if we bombarded it with very powerful scanners, we could activate its systems. But they told me I was paranoid, that it was just a strange comet, that, his voice faltered. Who told you that? Mike interrupted, his voice hard as steel. Vance pointed at the man with the scar. Ask Agent Morrison here. Or rather, ask his bosses at the agency. They wanted to wake that thing up. They wanted to see what would happen. They wanted data. Sarah looked at Morrison, who remained impassive as a statue. Is that true? She asked. Morrison did not deny it. There are levels of information that exceed your security clearance, Director Chen. What I can say is that certain decisions were made by people far above all of us here. And those decisions were in the interests of national security. National security. Jennifer shouted, her voice breaking into rising hysteria. You awoken a potentially hostile alien probe billions of years old, and you call that security? We awakened an archive, Morrison corrected coldly. Ancient technology that may contain knowledge that would fundamentally change our position in the world. Strategic advantage. The blackout was necessary to contain panic while we assessed the situation. Sarah finally understood the whole game. It wasn't about science. It never was. It was about power. About who would control the most valuable knowledge in human history. And NASA, the entire organization, was just a piece on this much larger, much darker board. She looked at the screen showing 3I/Atlas. The object now pulsed with its own light, impossible geometry revealing itself on its surface as it approached. 11 minutes until maximum approach. And then Sarah made the most important decision of her life. Mike, she said calmly, do you still have access to the emergency broadcast system? Mike blinked in confusion. The global broadcast? Yes, it's on the auxiliary network, but activate it. Morrison took a step forward, hand on his holster. Director Chen, I can't allow you to. You can't stop me, Sarah interrupted, taking the USB drive out of her pocket and raising it above her head. Either you kill me in front of 16 witnesses and cause an international incident, or you let me do my job. Which is to inform humanity that we are about to make first contact with extraterrestrial technology. She looked him straight in the eye. Choose quickly, Agent Morrison. We have 10 minutes. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah could hear her own heart beating like war drums. She was betting everything on a single move, that Morrison did not have authorization to commit murder in the middle of NASA with so many witnesses. That there were still lines that even secret agencies would not cross. Finally, Morrison took half a step back. You are making a mistake that will haunt you for the rest of your life. Maybe, Sarah replied, already moving toward the terminal. But at least I'll be making my mistake. Not yours. As Sarah connected the drive and began preparing the broadcast that would expose everything to the world, she didn't know that deep in space, just 9 minutes away, 3I/Atlas had completed its initial analysis of Earth. And what that ancient billion-year-old artificial intelligence had decided about humanity was yet to be revealed. But one thing Sarah knew for sure, the next few minutes would determine whether the human species would enter the galactic community as a partner, or as something completely different. The clock was ticking, and the truth was about to become impossible to hide. Sarah inserted the USB drive into the main terminal as her fingers danced across the keyboard with surgical precision. Every second counted. Mike had already started the global broadcast sequence. In 7 minutes, every astronomical observatory, space agency, and news network on the planet would receive the raw data on 3I/Atlas. There would be no way to delete it. There would be no way to hide it. You have 30 seconds to abort this, Morrison said behind her, his voice icy. After that, the consequences will be. Whatever the consequences, I'll face them, Sarah replied without taking her eyes off the screen. But I won't let you bury the greatest discovery in human history because you're afraid of losing control. The transmission progress bar was at 23% when all the lights in the room flickered again. But this time it wasn't a blackout. It was something different. Something that made every person in the room freeze instantly. All the screens, every monitor, every display, every system in the room, simultaneously switched to the same image, the live feed from 3I/Atlas. And the object was no longer approaching. It was stationary, completely motionless in space, defying every law of orbital physics. That's impossible, Mike whispered, his voice trembling. Moving objects don't just stop like that. Not without. The screens flickered. And then, for the first time in 4.5 billion years of Earth's history, humanity received a direct message from non-human intelligence. They weren't words. They weren't sounds. It was something that manifested directly in their minds, everyone in the room simultaneously, as if strange, ancient thoughts were being gently deposited into their consciousnesses. Sarah felt her legs buckle. Jennifer fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Even Morrison paled, his hand dropping his gun. The message was simple, terrible in its simplicity, beautiful in its devastating honesty. You have awakened. Welcome. Now you must choose. Choose what? Sarah heard her own voice, distant, as if someone else were speaking. The answer came in an avalanche of information that crashed over their minds. Sarah saw, not with her eyes, but with something deeper, the truth about 3I/Atlas. She saw ancient civilizations that had left millions of these probes scattered across the galaxy eons ago. She saw that they were tests. Not weapons. Not invasions. Tests for emerging civilizations. Species that develop technology face the great filter. Those who use it to dominate each other do not survive. Those who use it to unite, evolve. You have been observed. You have awakened our probe. Now you must prove which path you will choose. And then Sarah saw the real test. She saw that in the next 2 hours, 3I/Atlas would open completely, transmitting to Earth technologies that would solve hunger, disease, energy shortages. All human suffering could end. But there was one condition: the information would be transmitted openly to everyone. It could not be monopolized. It could not be militarized. It had to be shared equally among all of humanity. If you try to control the knowledge, if only a few of you try to hold on to power, we will leave. And we will not return for 10,000 years. This is your only chance in this era. Choose wisely. The mental connection broke. Sarah staggered, leaning on the console. Around her, everyone in the room was in varying states of shock. But it was what happened in the next 30 seconds that would change everything. Morrison recovered first. Sarah saw in his eyes the exact moment he made his decision. He picked up the radio and spoke quickly, his voice urgent. Code Sierra Tango 9. Authorize full containment protocol. Neutralize all transmission systems. No one leaves this facility. Confirm. No. Jennifer screamed, throwing herself at him. Morrison pushed her away easily, but those 3 seconds of distraction were enough. Sarah pressed enter. The transmission was complete. 100%. The data on 3I/Atlas, including the recording of the telepathic message that all of NASA's neural monitoring systems had captured, was now racing through fiber optic cables to 543 destinations around the globe. Observatories in China. Stations in Russia. Agencies in Europe. Universities in Africa, South America, Asia. There was no stopping it now. The whole world would know in minutes. Morrison stared at the screen displaying transmission complete, and something inside him snapped. It wasn't anger. It was resignation. It was the look of a man who had just lost the most important war of his life. You have no idea what you've just done, he said calmly. Of the chaos you're about to unleash. No, Sarah replied, feeling tears of exhaustion and relief burning her eyes. I know exactly what I've done. I've given humanity the chance to make the right choice. For the first time, without manipulation, without secrets, without people like you deciding our fate in the shadows. It was Mike who broke the ensuing silence. Sarah, you need to see this. He pointed to a monitor showing global news feeds. The story was exploding in real time. #First Contact was trending instantly. Governments around the world were being forced to respond. More importantly, scientists across the planet were already mobilizing, forming independent coalitions to receive and share data from 3I/Atlas. Humanity was responding. And not with panic. With curiosity. With hope. With unity. Jennifer held Sarah's hand, squeezing it tightly. Do you think we'll pass the test? Sarah looked at the screen showing 3I/Atlas slowly beginning to open like an impossible cosmic flower, preparing to share knowledge from civilizations that had been dead for billions of years. She looked at Mike, who was smiling for the first time in hours. She looked at Vance, who was crying silently, his tears a mixture of regret and relief. And then she looked at Morrison. The agent remained motionless, but Sarah saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Doubt. Maybe even hope. As if part of him, buried under layers of training and secret orders, wanted to believe that humanity could surprise him. I don't know if we'll make it, Sarah admitted honestly. But for the first time in history, the decision isn't in the hands of a few powerful men in dark rooms. It's in the hands of all of us. As it should be. On the screens around them, the world watched the impossible unfold. World leaders were being forced into public statements. Scientists broadcast live from their laboratories, validating the data. Ordinary people on the streets looked up at the sky, knowing that on that night, everything had changed. And 3I/Atlas waited. Patient. Eternal. A silent guardian left by cosmic ancestors to guide, or judge, the young who dared to look to the stars. Sarah Chin didn't know if she would go down in history as a hero or as the woman who condemned humanity to galactic ostracism. But she knew one thing for sure: she had given the world the only thing that really mattered. A choice. And now, for the first time since monkeys looked up at the night sky and wondered what those lights were, humanity faced its ultimate test. Not a test of technology. Not a test of strength. A test of character. The clock read 4:29 a.m. The longest night in human history was about to end. And when the sun rose, it would be over a world that would never be the same again. The 3I/Atlas broadcast would begin in 47 minutes. And the entire Earth waited, collectively holding its breath, to find out if they were ready for what was to come. 47 minutes later, when 3I/Atlas began its transmission, Sarah was sitting on the floor of the control room, leaning against the cold wall, watching history unfold in real time across dozens of screens. Around her, the entire team, including Morrison and his agents, had become spectators of the most important moment in human existence. The data came in waves. It wasn't just formulas or technical diagrams. It was pure knowledge, translated in a way that any human mind could understand. Clean, unlimited energy. Cures for diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia. Agricultural techniques that could feed trillions. Desalination technology that would make drinking water abundant. And more. Much more. But the most extraordinary thing was not the knowledge itself. It was how the world was reacting. Sarah, you need to see this, Jennifer said, kneeling beside her and holding a tablet. The screen showed live feeds from across the planet. In Beijing, Chinese scientists were broadcasting live the implementation of the first clean energy prototypes, sharing every step openly. In Johannesburg, South African doctors were already translating medical data and posting it freely on the internet. In Sao Paulo, Brazilian engineers were collaborating in real time with teams in Japan, India, and Germany. There were no governments blocking information. There were no corporations trying to monopolize technologies. There were only people, millions of them, working together because they finally understood that this was the only way to survive the test. We're passing, Sarah whispered, barely able to believe it. Humanity is actually passing. Mike sat down across from her, his face showing deep exhaustion but also something that looked like peace. You knew it would work, he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah shook her head. I didn't know anything, Mike. I just took a chance. I bet that when people had the chance to do the right thing, without manipulation, without artificial fear, they would choose well. She looked at him. You helped me do that. The Alpha 7 protocol. You knew I would need time to act. Mike smiled wearily. The Alpha 7 protocol was never just about hostile situations. Remember when we created it? You said that the greatest risk to NASA didn't come from outside, but from within. From people who would put personal interests above humanity's mission. He looked at Morrison, who was listening to the conversation in silence. The full protocol was, when legitimate authorities are compromised, loyalty must be to the truth, not to the hierarchy. I always knew that one day we might need it. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. You risked your career. Your life. Our career has always been about taking humanity to the stars, Mike replied simply. If that meant breaking a few rules to ensure we got there as a united species rather than a divided one, then it was worth every second. 3 hours after the initial broadcast, Director Castellano, the real one, who had boarded an emergency flight from Geneva, entered the control room. His face was pale, but not with anger. With understanding. He walked straight to Sarah, who stood up automatically, preparing to face the consequences of her actions. Castellano studied her for a long moment. Then he did something no one expected. He reached out his hand. Director Chen, he said formally, shaking her hand firmly. On behalf of NASA and humanity, thank you. You did what I didn't have the courage to do. He lowered his voice, his eyes watering. I knew about the pressures. About the orders coming from above to control the information. And I failed to resist. You didn't fail. Sarah couldn't speak. The validation was overwhelming. Castellano turned to Morrison. Agent, you can inform your superiors that NASA will no longer be complicit in cover-ups. If your agency wants to continue working with us, it will be with complete transparency. Or you can take your covert operations and, he seemed to search for the right words, then simply said, take them elsewhere. Morrison remained impassive for 5 long seconds. Then, surprisingly, a small smile appeared on his face. Understood. Director. I'll pass on the message. He looked at Sarah. For the record, Director Chen, you were right. And I was wrong. That doesn't happen often in my line of work. He paused. I hope your humanity proves worthy of the faith you have placed in it. We will, Sarah replied with a conviction she finally, truly felt. 2 weeks later, Sarah Chen sat in a special session of the United Nations. Beside her were Jennifer, Mike, and even Vance, who had been completely exonerated when the truth about his attempts to protect humanity came to light. They testified about the events of that night as representatives from 193 nations listened in respectful silence. People ask me if I was afraid. Sarah spoke into the microphone, her voice echoing through the historic hall. And yes, I was terrified. But not of the object in space. Not of the alien technology. I was afraid of ourselves. Of our ability to squander the greatest opportunity in history because of greed, fear, or pride. She looked around the room, seeing faces from every nation, every color, every belief. But you surprised me. All of you. When you had the choice between division and unity, between hoarding power and sharing knowledge, you chose the right path. Not because you were forced to, but because when the truth is fully revealed, when there is no manipulation clouding our judgment, humanity is fundamentally good. The silence that followed was profound. Then, starting with a delegate from Kenya, followed by one from Vietnam, then Brazil, Iceland, Argentina, one by one, all 193 representatives rose in ovation. Sarah felt Jennifer hold her left hand and Mike hold her right. Vance, sitting behind her, gently placed a hand on her shoulder. And in that moment, Sarah understood that there weren't just 4 people there. There were billions. Every person who had chosen to collaborate rather than compete. Every scientist who shared data freely. Every leader who put humanity above their nation. 3I/Atlas departed 3 days later, its mission accomplished. But before disappearing into the interstellar void, it sent one last message. Simple. Profound. Eternal. You have learned. You have evolved. When you are ready to look beyond your solar system, we will be waiting. Not as masters, but as equals. Welcome to the conscious universe. Use the gift we have given you well. And remember, the greatest technology is not that which conquers worlds. It is that which unites hearts. 6 months later, hunger had been eradicated in 47 countries. Diseases that killed millions were being cured. Clean energy was replacing fossil fuels at an unprecedented rate. And most importantly, nations that had been in conflict for decades were beginning to talk, to collaborate, to understand that they were part of something much bigger than their differences. The world did not become perfect. There were still problems. There were still people resisting change. But for the first time in history, Humanity was moving in the same direction. And all because one tired woman, on one impossible night, decided that truth was more important than control. Sarah Chin never considered herself a hero. When asked about that night, she always said the same thing. I just did what any person with a conscience should do. I gave people complete information and trusted them to make the right choice. And they did. The lesson that night taught was not about alien technology or cosmic mysteries. It was about something much more fundamental. That transparency beats manipulation. That trust in ordinary people trumps control by a powerful few. That when you treat humanity as responsible adults capable of making good choices, rather than children who need to be protected from dangerous truths, they often surprise you in wonderful ways. The biggest blackout in NASA's history lasted only 47 minutes. But the light that darkness revealed continues to shine. And it will continue to shine as long as there are people willing to bet on the fundamental goodness of humanity, even when it means risking everything. Because in the end, it wasn't scientific data or advanced technology that saved humanity in that cosmic test. It was a simple, deeply human choice, to choose truth over secrecy, to choose unity over division, choosing to trust each other instead of controlling each other. And that choice made all the difference. If this story made you think about the kind of world we want to build together, about the power of transparency and trust, leave your like and subscribe to the channel, because stories that remind us of the best of humanity are the ones we most need to share.